Relatively early in the game, Heather first meets Claudia at the mall. As the leader of the Order, Claudia Wolf is the spiritual successor of Dahlia Gillespie. And Claudia's namesake comes from the Roman name Claudius, which is a royal family known for its treachery and predation, even ruthlessly betraying members of their own family, as evidenced by Agrippina the Younger, the wife of Emperor Claudius. And of course, the surname Wolf lends even more credence to the predatory nature of the Order and its willingness to cause great pain and suffering in order to achieve its aims. At least this is Claudia's view. Just like Dahlia, Claudia is barefoot and proselytizes about cleansing this wicked world and ushering in a paradise on earth through the birth of a god into the physical realm. A God born of great pain and suffering unto this earth, which through such adversity is presumed to give this God a great sense of compassion for mankind's plight, thereby transforming the imperfect world we live in into a place where pain, suffering, disease, and old age are no longer in existence. In this sense, we can say that the emergence of a deity into physical reality is exactly the opposite idea of the human quest of ascension from the physical to the higher realms of spirit. Such a notion of a spiritual being born into the world of flesh and animalistic desires lends an unsettling mix of religious piety with hedonism. Another example of keeping the player and the characters, Heather in this case, keeping her completely off balance. There are many religious and energetic reasons to go barefoot in a temple, of course. To go about barefoot throughout the entire town of Silent Hill infers a deep religious conviction that all the world is a sacred place, which needs to be cleansed of its wickedness and restored to its true form. Claudia has a rather pagan, witch-like, and otherworldly quality to her, which certainly adds to the allure. There may also be a loose association with her and, of course, the drug White Claudia. And, of course, the feminine energy is the embodiment of physicality, of nature, chaos, and unpredictability, of which I would say Claudia fulfills this role quite convincingly. So after Heather does all the things with the tongs, the walnut, and the cooked dog, it's time for a very important rite of passage through the moon door to face the game's first threshold guardian. There is quite a lot to unpack here before Heather moves beyond this doorway. Notice a large halo of the sun symbol appears to be burned into the concrete above the moon door. There is a significant reason for this, as the relationship between the halo of the sun and the moon door should be familiar to anyone familiar with basic occult symbolism and anyone who has seen my previous Silent Hill videos. The bringing together of heaven and earth, or of the physical with the metaphysical, is the most obvious indication here. Notice that the halo of the sun is above the moon door. This is an appropriate placement since the sun is closely associated with God, the higher realms of spirit, the masculine, or the metaphysical. So this symbol would have to be presented above or supernal to the moon door. The symbolism associated with the moon, of course, is closely related to the feminine, sense experience, and the physical world. Both sun and moon, metaphysical and physical, or the immortal and mortal, must be reconciled or brought together in order to complete the ritual of God's birth. The writing on the moon door makes reference to conception and childbirth. A child born of the union of gods and men, or the soul and the flesh, with Heather as the conduit or messenger between these two worlds. It should be mentioned that 280 days is considered the period of a normal pregnancy. However, this does not account for the date of conception, which could be some 2 to 3 weeks on top of that, which brings us closer to 300 days. Hence this message we're seeing here on the moon door. The 300th day of the year occurs on October 27th. Add 1 day for leap years, of course. And this day falls firmly in the zodiacal fixed sign of Scorpio. Upon the door, there is also a brief acknowledgement of this most unholy union, which has been initiated by the actions of the order. This tells us quite clearly that performing the actions required in the order to pass through this door represent a Goetia and most definitely not a theurgy. The term Goetia is a Latin word which refers to the ritualistic evocation of demons, as anyone who has learned about magic should know, and as we would expect to find in ceremonies of black magic, often reserved for purposes of egoic power and control. Whereas theurgy is a set of magic rituals or even religious ceremonies with the intention of invoking the presence of a deity for purposes of henosis, which is a communion of man with the forces of the divine, but not necessarily man trying to order around or trying to command some supernal forces. Both types of evocations represent a unity between the physical and the metaphysical in a certain sense. And as we shall see in many examples, it seems that Team Silent has taken inspiration for much of the occult symbolism used in this game from the book Transcendental Magic, Its Doctrine and Ritual by Eliphas Levi. And as we can see, the slot to place the moonstone in the door completes the outline for the invisible portion of the moon. This means that the moon phase depicted on the door that we see here is waxing crescent, which is the very first and most powerful phase after the new moon in terms of occult rituals. In the book Transcendental Magic, it reads, "The new moon is favorable at the beginning of all magical works." So this is highly significant that Heather's putting this stone, this moonstone, into the moon door in this configuration. We must also consider that the planet Venus also has phases similar to the moon, so I wouldn't rule out a connection there either. Both of them are often used interchangeably in magic for ceremonies. Now, in order to progress in the game, of course, Heather places the stone in the door as an acknowledgement that she is entering into the first of a series of rituals which will presumably lead up to the final ceremony, that being the birth of God. This moon door ritual is centered around conception as the first stage, hence an early stage of the lunar cycle depicted on the moon door. The union of the halo of the sun and the moon door represent this unholy birth of the god of the order. But the moonstone itself has a very special significance that we need to examine in more detail. First, remember the 300th day reference, which is the sign of Scorpio. This, besides the most obvious reference to the moonstone representing the physical domain, which of course is feminine, this stone is quite commonly confused with other stones, and that's namely the stone I want to talk about is the opal. They're often confused with each other. Team Silent are, of course, video game creators. They're not gemologists or jewelers, and I think it's entirely possible that the term moonstone was used for its obvious astrological or occult associations. However, the stone in Heather's inventory much closer resembles that of an opal. It just so happens that the opal is the birthstone of Scorpio, which is a water sign. And Scorpio is ruled by the planet Mars and Pluto. Now, Mars represents courage, and Pluto represents the underworld, which perfectly describes Heather Mason's situation as well as her demeanor. Scorpio is the sign of death and rebirth. Scorpios are intense and authentic. They dig deep and probe the depths of the unknown, no matter what they may find. They wear a hard exterior, but are loving and sincere once their shell is cracked. I mean, if this doesn't describe, if this doesn't implicate Heather as the only one who can execute this ceremony, then I don't know who this is representing. Heather's placing of her birthstone in the moon door is quite significant. With all of this evidence, including breaking open a walnut to reveal the gemstone, all of this is meant for Heather specifically, as she is an integral part of this dark ritual. A ritual which takes careful preparation and planning, as well as a series of certain ceremonial events which Heather herself must be part of in order for the god of the order to be born in the first place. If this were not the case, then Claudia Wolf would have abducted Heather upon first meeting her. And of course, she doesn't. So there's this, throughout this entire series, we'll see that the specific rituals have to happen in a certain order and in a certain way throughout the story.